Welcome to KRQE's New Mexico News Insiders. Here's Gabrielle Burkhart and Chris McKee. Sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
So here we are, the end of the year, start of a new one. Once again, talking about what's happening this year. And Gabby, of course, you know what this means, right?
Yeah.
We're back. We're back with what we've dubbed the New Mexico News Insiders annual year-to-year recap special. This will now be our fourth episode of this kind.
I know. For the last 3 years, you and I have done these sort of like forward-looking recap conversations about the biggest stories of the year, what news stories to look out for in the coming new year. But this time, Chris, we're switching it up a little bit.
Yeah. We are taking a new approach. The last times we did this, it was a lot of editing. Let's be honest, a lot of audio editing. And this time we decided kind of a new approach to bring in a few guests here as well. And each one of us has been asked to bring a big news topic to the table to talk about. So a big topic of news in the year 2024.
Yeah, let's introduce our guests, the main anchors at KRQE News 13. We have Dean Staley and Jessica Garate. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
And before your night side shifts, I'll note.
Yeah, so we're running low on time already.
Yeah, we have got to get going. Before we get into each of our four topics that we've picked, you two have a unique perspective in the newsroom that I want to acknowledge out of the gate, because you're both familiar with like all the news stories that we put out each day, because you're delivering the news in all the newscasts. So I want to ask you broadly first, how do you find 2024 in general in terms of what happened in New Mexico news? If we can start with like Dean, high level. How do you look back at the news of 2024?
Wow. Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Took a long time to get a ticket. It's like, to get a ticket, it's like, pretty elite club. So that's a great question, Gabby. I think the things that stand out are some of the events that have to do with climate or wildfire. I mean, we've had a crazy year that way. The DWI scandal, obviously, with Albuquerque police is, I think all of us were just drop-jawed when that came down, when we started hearing rumblings about that in the very beginning of the year, right? I think there's also the kind of consistent things that we follow in terms of crime. Everyone cares about crime, and it seems like there's been a bigger push to, different laws. How do we tackle this? And still some intransigence on the part of lawmakers, still no real movement that you thought, okay, this is a thing that law enforcement has been calling for, So I think that's an interesting thing where that may be reaching a critical sort of tipping point if you stand back and look at it. I don't know that it has, but it feels like it's moving in a direction. Those are the things that, for me, and then I know Jess is going to bring up CYFD, which is always something that we care about, we're concerned about, our viewers care about, and it seems almost unsolvable. From the broader perspective, and you just think, what is it going to take? So those are the things that sort of stand out to me globally.
I definitely, the DWI scandal, it was one of those that we're hearing what was going on, and it was just truly unbelievable that we were having that happening, allegedly. And so covering that has been, we've stayed on top of it, and just every twist and turn you take, it's just more and more information where you're like, wow, did this happen? And I've been here where there's been several scandals where there was, they had an evidence room scandal. They've had the DOJ come in and shooting, and this was just one that was just like, wow, like this, it really stood out. The other big story that I thought of the year was the election. Seeing New Mexico covering politics here for 20 years and seeing its shift from being a battleground state, and we'd have like every candidate come here as their last stop, to becoming solid blue and nobody, just being completely ignored, to here. And seeing where, we're not as blue as we were the past, under the past 8 years, I would say the past two administrations. And so it's just interesting to see where New Mexico is shifting, and how much, how much Kamala, she won, but not nearly what the numbers were for Biden. And so just seeing that shift was really interesting to me, and seeing where New Mexico is headed. So those were really big, powerful stories, I thought. And then, of course, we just, the fires and the flooding have been just so awful for our state, and just seeing how everyone's trying to pick up the pieces.
Yeah. We'll certainly come back to some of these topics with a little bit more, but for before we get into that kind of round robin discussion around our picks for the big news stories of the year, we wanted to just run through some of the biggest headlines here for 2024 to give people a little bit of a refresher. Some of this both of you have touched on, and by no means is this an exhaustive list, but some big headlines here.
Yeah, in January, you guys mentioned we had the reveal of the APD DWI scandal, which we will give you more context for if you hadn't heard about all of that. By March, we had the Lobos return to the NCAA tournament for the first time in a decade, but it was short-lived. They lost to Clemson in the first round.
So in spring, Albuquerque police also announced that after 10 years of reform through the Department of Justice, they are almost fully compliant with the settlement agreement outlining hundreds of changes related to how they do their jobs.
Yeah, and then by summer, we had the eruption of the South Fork and Salt wildfires in and around Ruidoso, which would lead to widespread evacuations, homes being destroyed. In July, we had global media turn their eyes toward New Mexico when Alec Baldwin suddenly in mid-trial had charges dismissed against him for the fatal 2021 movie set shooting outside of Santa Fe, with cinematographer Helena Hutchins was killed on the film set of Rust.
On the legislative side, and some of this speaks to what we've talked a little bit about, the governor called a rare special session this summer. In July, she pushed for the passage of some criminal related legislation and also legislation related to competency. That session, though, it really ended with a whimper. Not a single crime bill passed in just a few hours of discussion. Some Democratic lawmakers called out the governor, saying that the session was, looking to tackle too much in too little of time.
And then by the fall, we had Roswell in southeast New Mexico hit with historic flooding. They got hammered with nearly 6 inches of rain in a single storm over the course of just about 5 hours. Hundreds of people were rescued from floodwaters and 2 people were killed.
And now here at the end of the year, one of the things we can talk about is the end, what we think will be the end of a long drawn out process. This is where we expect the Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon Claims Office will be closing their window, supposedly, in December here in accepting notices of loss, closing a chapter of more than 2 years after the worst wildfire in New Mexico history. So, yeah,
not our most exhaustive list, but those are some of the big 2024 headlines that we've reported on. So now we want to get to our round table discussion. We've each brought a topic to give a little bit more context for. So let's start, Dean, with your pick.
What stands out to me, and this is a very broad topic, and it encompasses a lot of the stories that we cover day in and day out, and that is what feels like the effects of climate change. We've been talking about climate change for decades now. There's been debate and discussion, but I don't think anyone who's paying attention can deny that things are changing in a really interesting way right now. And you've got, you still have some people who are saying, well, this is, I think Trump is still saying this is a hoax perpetrated by China. It's not real. And then you have other people saying, if we don't fix this in the next year, we're done, right? We can't go back. So there are people on far edges of this, but I think almost everyone in the middle has to acknowledge that something is happening that has not happened before, that is profound. And I got with Grant Tosterud, our chief meteorologist.
Yes, frequent listener.
Yeah,
he's been a guest.
And let me point this out. I think this is important. We talked about wildfires. We had Hermit's Peak Calf Canyon. We had the Salt Fire. Tons of fires. Let's sort of take that off the list for this, because I think anyone who studies wildfire and forest management knows that our forests in this country have been mismanaged for decades, where they haven't allowed fires to burn naturally and they've put them out as soon as they could. And so we have this sort of these tinder boxes that have built up. So I don't know that it's helpful to talk about the wildfires as part of climate change. Maybe maybe those places were drier than they should have been. But there's been a lot of really human impact on letting forests get out of control in terms of the amount of fuel that's just waiting to catch on fire. So let's take those off the list in terms of talking about these events. I think I don't think it's fair, and I think it's sort of confusing to bring that in, because human beings really have contributed to these massive fires that we haven't seen before. So you take the wildfires out of it. This, and again, Grant Toster would get some credit here, the third hottest summer on record in New Mexico. The top 5 warmest falls on record, September through November. And Grant cautions that the official numbers are not yet in, but he ginned these up. The warmest balloon fiesta on record, which we all experienced, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You remember going in with big coats and jackets.
Freezing past years.
Yes. Really changed.
The years that Jess and I were bundled up, like freezing to death on the set out there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Currently sitting on the hottest year on record. This is so far. This goes all the way back to 1895. Albuquerque proper, the third hottest year on record so far. And Roswell, the hottest year on record so far. Then you have some real extreme events. So those are sort of the big numbers, and that's real data. Then you have events like the Albuquerque flooding, and some people have forgotten about this. June 29th, we had record flooding in Albuquerque. We had the record Roswell flooding, which was absolutely devastating. That's only been, a month now? A month ago? No one can remember a flood like that in a place like Roswell. And of course, the flooding in Ruidoso, and I tend to discount some of that because a lot of the flooding there, of course, was caused by burn scar, right? And the fire was mixed in with that. But people forget this one, the Willard storm. This is a town south of Moriarty, June 20th, 6 to 8 inches of rain in 3 hours fell in Willard. And it's a very flat area. This is down sort of between Mountain Air, south of Moriarty, not quite to Mountain Air, a very flat area. It was this flat plain was just flooded. They had lime-sized hail. So these are all real events. And then we had record Las Vegas snowfall in early November, which everyone, we were talking about Las Vegas is going to get 30 inches in less than a day. So I think we experience these things differently. There's the data, and then as news people, we experience the event. Right, we're covering these events, but for Jess, I know, and maybe Jess feels this way too, part of it, you just feel it viscerally. I mean, I remember walking out at the end of the night, 11 o'clock at night, we're done with the 10:30 news, and you walk out and we're downtown Albuquerque, and it's November, and it's 15 degrees above normal. It feels balmy out, and it just feels odd and a little spooky. Like, I grew up here. I don't remember any, Halloween was always cold and snowy as a kid growing up here, and then you're getting into this place where even later than Halloween feels way above normal. So those are the different ways that we experience this, and I just think it's interesting. It feels like it's happening, and you wonder. I guess the big question is, can places like Roswell survive if they get another flood like this? If they recover from this, and it's going to take years, what if they get another one 5 years from now that does just as much damage? That would be horrific, right? So, and are these places sustainable if this is going to become the climate?
I think you've certainly seen some of that discussion, I know, in other parts of the U.S., right, where you have examples, particularly, I think this has been exemplified in Florida, where after all of these major destructive storms, you have the reluctance of many of these, massive insurance companies that are, again, reluctant to really go back and allow customers to access policies with premiums that either aren't insanely outrageous or at all. We've basically seen, I think, in this year of these last few years, companies back away from offering insurance, which a lot of times is required to be able to have structures and live in places like this. So it plays a big role in the future of New Mexico, and we kind of do wonder, what is the future after these disasters? Do companies service these communities in the same way as they once did?
But not only that, where people live, where people will choose to live, also impacts the economics of that whole community. I think about Ruidoso, they were trying to recover from the wildfire and then the flood, but that's like a mountain ski town community. People have second homes there. They go there to ski. And then you think about the staffing situation, right? Like, they were already suffering for staff, year-round staff. Now, if you can't house people, how do you recover in the long term for some of these more rural communities? It makes you wonder.
Well, and let's be specific. In Ruidoso, the owner of the Noisy Water Winery, very successful business down there, lost, I think, a dispensary, a ski shop, the Alto ski shop, which we all remember that video of the ski shop burning, and also, I think, lost a bar in that same time. His vineyards, I don't think, were affected, or the winery itself, and the business downtown is still there. But Gabby, to your point, people have to, if you're going to continue that business, you need workers, and there's no place for them to stay because so much of the housing has been lost to fire. So there's absolutely this the minute you have an event like this, it's just the beginning of this tidal wave of economic effects.
I always worry about our mountains. Like all of us enjoy going up to the mountains with the snow. And are we going to see that in 10, 15 years? Are we going to be getting the snowfall? And we see that change now. I mean, I've gone to Sandia where they were buried with snow at Sandia Peak. And then, the next winter it was bare. And so, seeing those changes. And then I think what also stands out with this for me is, we do, as news people, we're constantly gauging, we're taking a look at, we're doing polling, we're seeing what's at the top of mind for everyone in our state, crime, homelessness, and this isn't usually one of them. And it worries me. I'm on the day-to-day, how many people are thinking about conserving water and how many people are doing different things just to help in the future. And I just don't know if that's really at the forefront of what people are thinking about, and how do we change that, and how do we help with our future. And I do really praise our state in being a real leader and looking at different ways of conserving and different, I feel like we do a pretty good job and try to lead the way in some, bringing in, we have our city uses a lot of solar energy, and you see the solar panels at the zoo that are helping, with energy on our transportation and things like that. So I do think, and I appreciate that our state is forward thinking in that area.
We'll be right back with more of the New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Monica Wicki, host of New Mexico Living. This episode of New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS. If you enjoy New Mexico News Insiders, check out New Mexico in Focus, a great source for insights about what's happening in our state. Catch their podcast and videos at nmpbs.org or stream it anytime, anywhere on the free PBS app. Now, let's continue to New Mexico News Insiders.
Yeah, it is interesting because when you think about, all of the policy-making decisions, sometimes it can be years before we arrive upon how to address a particular type of crime. But when you're talking about these natural disasters, it can be overnight that an entire town is destroyed, and that ultimately has an even more monumental impact on, the hemming and hawing that can come over how to adjust a statute.
We saw that certainly with Herman's Peak, Calf Canyon, and FEMA coming in, building offices there locally.
Yeah.
But it's certainly something that I think we'll continue to cover, and year over year, we'll be able to look at data like what Grant is providing. And, he was on our show talking about whether conspiracy, theorists out there, and he gets slammed, every time that word is mentioned, climate change. But certainly there are hard data that we can look at year over year and say, like, something's changing.
Yeah, well, and I've always taken comfort and a little pride in the fact that New Mexico, because I've lived all around I grew up here, but I've lived all around I've lived in Tampa and Atlanta and Minneapolis and different places for the job. And I've always sort of celebrated the fact that New Mexico really is sort of a resilient place when you think of, like, we don't have hurricanes, we don't have earthquakes, tornadoes are pretty rare, and they're only in parts of the state, in the very sparsely populated areas, which is good. And so you think, wow, and because we have so much elevation, we're a little bit insulated from the actual warming, as opposed to Phoenix, which is just, you just can't believe how long the summers are lasting there now. And you feel like, well, but this is something that I really care about rural New Mexico too, right? Like, I went to second and third grade in Chama, right? Wonderful, like, smaller communities, mountain communities all around the state. And I think they are not as hardened, they're more vulnerable to these kind of events than, say, the metro. The metro we have a MAFCA, we have flood control, we have different, it's a much more resilient place if you live in the metro, which is 1 million people if you count them all up, than these other places. So I'm really concerned about, as Jess said, not just sort of that lifestyle too, like those communities, because we care about those people, but also that lifestyle that is a rich part of living here in New Mexico, whether it's Angel Fire or Ruidoso or Roswell.
Yeah. Gabby, let's dip into your topic here. If you can tell us what you chose. This has to do with Albuquerque Police and the aforementioned DWI scandal. For those who don't know what it is, what is it?
Yeah, I feel like I need to timestamp myself right out of the gate, because this is one of those stories that has continued to evolve, and sometimes it can be any given day that happens. So today, as we are recording this in early December, before we all take some vacation time for the holidays, no one has been criminally charged. But again, investigation that could change with potential federal indictments. So just a quick recap of some of the basics. The news of the scandal broke open on January 18th. We learned federal agents were raiding the homes of some APD officers, as well as a prominent defense attorney who we later learned was Thomas Clear III. So that same month, the Bernalillo County District Attorney's Office here dismissed hundreds of DWI cases in criminal court due to officers involved in those cases losing credibility. So there were obviously repercussions on individual cases, some of which we highlighted in our newscasts. Officers were being placed on leave pending an internal affairs investigation and also a separate federal investigation by the FBI. So then in February, fast forward, I published a story that I feel like helped paint a picture of how the scheme was potentially working. So that story was featuring a man named Carlos Smith. He has since sued with the ACLU. He's suing Albuquerque Police Department. But basically, he came forward after seeing that raid on television and was like, I've been to that house. He came forward. We had video of his DWI arrest at the time. The officer involved in his arrest was Joshua Montano. It basically painted this picture of, he was being booked after the DWI. The officer called him later from his cell phone, left a message, which we aired, said, I have your bracelet. It didn't get with all the rest of your property and booking. You can pick it up at this attorney's office. He felt a little uneasy, recorded that whole 18-minute interaction. And basically, he said he was having a conversation with Thomas Clear's paralegal, Rick Mendez, who guaranteed a dismissal for his case if he paid them $8,500. So meanwhile, my colleague Ann Perrette had also been publishing stories revealing how officers in the DWI unit were handling some cases. For example, failing to book alleged drunk drivers fully and letting them catch a ride home, claiming that the prisoner transport center was closed. So quick recap, since early January, of the officers we know that were under internal investigation, we've had at least 8 choose to resign or take early retirement rather than be interviewed by Internal Affairs. We had a commander get fired, another officer is still on leave, and then there's also an unnamed lieutenant who was reassigned. So that's where we're at today in December.
So in short, the scheme is really a group of officers accused of getting sort of under the table payments, working with an attorney, to then basically people accused of DWI were getting those cases dismissed. That's what the scheme is in short.
And there were a lot of questions that came out about, well, how do you get cases dismissed? We know one of those ways is through just missing court. So if an officer fails to appear, case usually gets dismissed. Go ahead.
I wanted to ask both of you perspective, because you've been reading the intros for these stories. You've been watching these stories all year. You mentioned this. There have been multiple other scandals. Why is this one such a big deal?
I think, there's such outrage. One, we've just notoriously had one of the worst drunk driving problems in the U.S., and that this was allowed to happen, if it happened, and allegedly. And also just... it came down to the injustice of things that, you could get your DWI dropped if you had money or who you knew. And what about all the other people who didn't have that? And then also that we had dozens of cases that got dropped that people got caught that will never face any consequences because of this case. So I think there was a lot of outrage in the community, a lot of, just seeing and hearing about this stuff. Like, it was like Gotham City, like, they're getting, the officers were getting paid off. And so, that's something that really stood out to me. And then the other issue is, I also sat down with Damon Eli, who is a local attorney here, who actually goes after bad attorneys. So also a former state lawmaker, and he had, and we still don't know how this all unfolded, but he had gone to the FBI after having 2 very separate cases of 2 people walking into his office saying, hey, there was something fishy about this. They told me to do this. And it was 2 people who didn't know each other. And he's like, what is going on? And he went to the FBI. So I'm glad there was people that did get pulled over and said, hey, and as you did your story as well, this is not right. And I also, and then I don't know how we got, we're looking at this has gone on for years. and how in that unit, if something was happening that someone didn't raise their hand, or anywhere in that department saying, hey, this is going on, or if they did they just get silenced? Like, there's so many questions with this story.
A couple of things. First, I want to take just a moment to brag about Gabby and Ann Perrette doing just remarkable work. And for the people who are listening who don't understand how this works, whenever you have a federal investigation, when the feds are involved, you're talking about the FBI here, and you're talking about APD in IA, right, Internal Affairs, right? You never get stuff leaked from these people, right? Those are pretty locked down places when investigations start. And maybe there's a Hollywood idea that you get tips, but you don't get that from the feds. That almost never happens. So in the very beginning, I want to remind everybody, we were sort of saying, there's a scandal. We think it involves this, and only and without getting any more official information, Gabrielle Burkhart and Ann Perrette just grinded on this story and ran court cases and said, wait a second, if you do the numbers, this lawyer has way more clearances than average, right? So that kind of real, shoe leather work.
Yeah. In the weeds reporting.
And I just say, please go watch these stories. They're remarkable. So we learned of this basically through that kind of reporting, where you're looking at the lapel video of an officer who seems to be behaving in ways that are very strange to the person that he just arrested, right? So just kudos. And if you haven't seen any of these stories, go on KRQE.com and look up our DWI. I think it's all under one banner now, where you can see all of this stuff. And I tell you, Jess and I on set, night after night, we're just drop-jawed by the reporting that you guys were doing and what we were learning. And and we talk about this stuff during the day in our editorial meetings, but then to see it on air and go, oh my goodness, okay. So I just am so proud of some of that work. It's just been amazing work, and it makes you proud to be part of this operation. The other thing I would say is, I think everyone around this table is a professional skeptic. Right. I mean, that's the job.
Yeah.
Right.
If your mother tells you she loves you, check it out. Right. Check it out. That's right.
Yeah.
But hopefully, if you're good at this and you last any length of time, you don't fall into cynicism. You don't become a cynic. Right. You guys are the most positive people I know, and I love being around you. So there's a sort of skepticism without falling into cynicism. But even as a skeptic, a professional skeptic, I think so. I mean, we just couldn't believe what we were hearing. It's just like, that can't be happening. That can't be true. I mean, there was a part of me that just was in disbelief. And as Jess mentioned, part of that is because we cover so much about, hey, St. Patrick's Day is coming. The county's paying for your Uber. Please don't drink it. And fundamentally in this business, fairness is just a massive part of what we do, right? You can do a tiny story or a massive scandal. What the viewer cares about is, are things fair? Like, it just boils down to that. Am I being treated fairly? Is the system fair? And that's what you're talking about, Jess, right?
Yes.
Like, everyone does their part. I got a designated driver tonight. The cops are out going after the bad guy, and then you realize, okay, this part of the system is rotten. So that to me was just a kind of a gut punch. That was hard to take, and it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around the fact that, oh my God, this is like like you said, out of a movie or something. This doesn't even feel.
And like you guys said, there's a lot that we have to sift through and investigate before we can put anything on air that we can back up, right? Like, so we were working our sources, we were talking to people off the record, having background discussions. But a lot of what we learned, is through just like putting together spreadsheets and looking at data and getting other people's, perspectives and experts. But one thing that stood out to me about this particular case is, yes, the timeline, but also the officers started dropping like flies. They started just resigning and forfeiting their retirement basically in order to not be interviewed by Internal Affairs. And I remember sitting down with the APD chief and asking, well, how can the public feel that anybody is going to be held accountable if they're just refusing to talk? And we can link to those stories, but he basically said, they have a lot at risk as well, because if they say anything differently to their federal investigation, they could be held, liable for that. So they didn't have a whole lot of incentive, he was saying, to talk to IA because of this federal investigation. But it just raises, a lot of questions when you see that happening, so many officers resigning.
Well, and I also thought that the letter, one of the officers, that when he resigned, the letter was given to the media from APD, and what he stated in there was just yes, and he was just
generational.
Saying it was generational, that he wasn't the only one, and I mean, just really just kind of laid out that it was happening.
And the context for that was interesting too, because the context was, hey, you guys think I'm the bad guy. I'm just part of this bigger thing that's been going on for a long time. Like you could tell he felt sort of personally attacked, as though like, I don't know why is my name out there? Right. And all of us sort of thought, okay, well, I wonder how many people he's talking about. And we may soon find out what those numbers are. But
that brings me to the question of what is ahead for this story in 2025? Because still, as you had mentioned off the top, nobody has been criminally charged. So there's a potential though there.
I mean, I think we're all waiting to see what the feds will do, because like this is a federal investigation. We know they already conducted raids of homes, and that was 12 months ago now. So, like you said, Dean, usually they're pretty tight-lipped about what evidence they do have, but we do know that, it has to be something. Part of the piece that I'm sure the feds are investigating is the whole money piece, right? If any officers were getting paid, where did the money go? What was it used for? I'm hoping, we will hopefully get some answers from that. Like I said, I'm time stamping myself. We're in early December. Will we see indictments before the end of the year? I don't know. Will they come early next year? I'm not sure. But the other thing is there was an election in November. So we're going to probably see some turnaround with the U.S. Attorney's Office. Will we see indictments before that happens? That's a big question mark. So to be continued.
Yes.
Stay tuned. So let's switch it up here. Jessica, you have a topic for our Stories of the Year episode. And I semi-laughed, but it is a very serious topic because I feel like the last year we interviewed you about around the holidays, you really brought us, into reality with your topic because it is a serious one. So tell us a little about your choice here.
Mine is CYFD. And just because we all know it's in a crisis, it's been a mess, it's been under scrutiny. We've tried so many different things to try to make this agency better. And what is it going to take? And so I'm just looking at, these are what I'll be looking at in 2025 and some of the things I'll be following that I'm hoping we're going to see some difference. And so the first one is going to be with the Attorney General, Raul Torres. And he's been very vocal about trying to fix that agency, finding solutions. What should we be doing? And one that he's right now is currently working on is he's investigating how we reunify children with their families. And he's going through dozens of cases and really seeing, where we're running into problems, seeing why we're making these choices. So for example, I did a story in Silver City where a little girl was found and she was found dead, and the little boy was taken from that home, put with grandma. And then the state is working to put him back in that home where they've already killed a child. And so
Parents
allegedly killed a child. They're being investigated. They're charged with the death. So I need to say allegedly, but she was found dead in that home. And so the AG is questioning, why would you even consider that? Why would you think this is a good idea? And we see that over and over again. And so he's reviewing dozens of cases, investigating and seeing why we're making those choices, and should we be changing how we make those choices, and what needs to be done? So I'm really following that, and I think we're going to see a lot of movement in that area. He's also going to be pushing for his Civil Rights Commission again, which was in his office, and that would help look at its attorneys having a voice for these children, and also looking at, he's like, why are they getting in trouble? Can we keep them out of the criminal justice system? Can we start earlier? What is causing problems? How can we help these kids? So I think that's going to play a big role. And then just some of the legislative pieces that I think that lawmakers are going to be considering. So the governor formed a committee, and they've been tasked with coming up with some solutions that they'll vote on, then they'll bring it to the lawmakers. They were supposed to have it by last month. It was not done yet, but some of the things that they're working on is making sure that some of the caseworkers have social work licenses to help in making better decisions in those cases, and that CYFD established targets and incentives to keep those employees, which is another big issue that they have because they have such high turnover. And then also keeping children out of foster care and just looking at recommendations on how the state lays out exactly how CYFD should make efforts to keep families together, and seeing what needs to be done and how do we keep them in a safe environment. And then also just trying to figure out how to get more foster families, and that's also been a big issue. And so those are the things I'm keeping an eye on, seeing what kind of things will move the needle a little bit. I will say that, we've gone through 3 secretaries in this administration, and the current secretary, Teresa Quesado, she's been the most open, I feel, and like she's been willing to sit down with us, and this has been probably some of the most access I've had in a while, and so I do feel like they're trying to be open and honest, and she was very clear with me. She's like, I have, which really like it says a lot. She said, I have employees that don't want to say they work for CYFD because they're embarrassed because of the scrutiny they're under. And so she's trying to work with a workforce that, lift them up, that's under attack all the time. And so there's so many pieces to this. Right. But those are the things that I'll be looking for, really focused on next year and see where they go.
It is a 60-day legislative session. Lawmakers always lean on that crutch of saying, well, if you got 60 days, you can take care of so much more than a 30-day, take it for what it's worth. But it is a 60-day session. We know, though, this has been an agency that's just been lingering with issues for as long as I've worked here, which is almost 12 years now. I don't know. What is the sense that you get that is this something that we feel on the cusp of actually making monumental changes toward? You mentioned this commission ideas. Everybody agrees something needs to change, but will it actually happen?
There's a couple of things, like looking at it just in, I've sat down with so many different secretaries, Monique Jacobson and, Judge V. Hill, and like Supreme Court Justice V. Hill, and like just all the different people that have been in this position, Brian Blaylock, and like and I've asked them the same questions over and over again, and there's been all these different solutions, but just taking all that information and looking at it from the outside, I feel that, some things that I think we'll see that will help that we're not going to see right now, but later on is, we have free pre-K and getting those children, in school earlier, having more adults in their lives, monitoring, making sure that they're being taken care of, they're getting food, that they're, I think that long-term will help make a dent in that. The other thing that's always been brought up, and I don't know if it's good or bad, but one thing last year that the legislature looked at was, should the secretary be appointed by the governor? And one of the things they were considering was a bipartisan committee that would find someone that knows childcare, because often you see that, the secretaries are placed in there with no background, come from different departments or whatnot. And so is that something that could make a difference if we have someone with a deep background in child welfare?
Yeah. Good questions. And kudos to you. And also Ann Barrett, she does a lot of stories on CYFD. It's another hard agency to report on. They always cite the Children's Code as, their reason to not give us information. But it takes, some dogged reporting to hold some of these players accountable, especially when there is so much turnover in leadership.
And that is one of my focuses too, especially next year. I mean, I've been fighting for records in these cases so that we can, especially when a child has died, because I feel like we need to know what's going on and could we have stopped this? And so many times we could have. And we're seeing that because we're paying record settlements to some families because of these deaths. And so I really, that is a focus of mine. And I've taken some agencies to the AG to try to get those records and just trying to get the best picture and showing that to the public and seeing what's working.
I wonder too how much of it is, it's a little bit like crime in the sense of, no one's figured out how to solve that problem in absolute terms. I think almost everyone who becomes a cop does it for the right reasons. They care about public service. They care about helping people. And I feel the same way about CYFD. No one gets into social work without some idea that I want to help people, right? So I wonder about the structural problems. Do you just have too many people? And we've seen them. You've got, a couple that's in their teens or early 20s, and they're addicted, and they're living in a hotel room on East Central, and they've got kids. I mean, you just can't imagine, this massive wave of demand in terms of, and the state can't just raise those kids for them, right? So you've got to find a way to, okay, how do we, keep the family together if that works or not? And there's not some massive list of foster parents saying, oh, we have an endless list, right, to take care of these kids. So I worry about what are the structural problems, and do you just have too few counselors with too many cases, trying to solve this problem? And like I said, without the resources without just, we can take all of these kids and send them to a different home where they have a better environment. That's a tough one.
It's a tough one for me to report on because I get, like there's one case where they're starting to like name the caseworkers, and I've gotten video of these caseworkers out at these, where children were placed back in the home and then they died a couple months later. And so, they're getting sued now. And so a child died, someone has to be held accountable. They're getting sued. So then that, trying to get, that's not gonna make other people wanting to get into those positions in an agency that's already hard, tough to find workers for. And then you're also dealing, and I feel for those workers, like you're dealing with some really horrific child abuse cases over and over again, and trying to make the decision on how to handle those cases. So it's a tough one because you want, that is a hard job, and I give a lot of credit to those people, but it's also, we have too many children dying.
And maybe there will be a shift structurally, too, from this idea, because it didn't come from nowhere, this idea that we want to keep kids in their own family, whether that means a relative or, and that has sort of been the norm. And we feel like, well, that's not working if you're putting them back in really dangerous situations. So maybe that was a strategy for a time that needs to be revisited and shifted.
We'll be right back with more on New Mexico News Insiders.
Hi, I'm Logan Rader, host of New Mexico Living. New Mexico News Insiders is sponsored by New Mexico PBS.
If you like New Mexico News Insiders, learn more about New Mexico in Focus, a weekly hour-long show analyzing decisions impacting New Mexico statewide. Stream it anytime, anywhere. Visit nmpbs.org and follow them on all social media platforms.
Now back to New Mexico News Insiders.
I want to wrap up. We got a little less than 10 minutes here, but I want to wrap up with the
Talk
topic.
fast, Chris. Talk fast.
Well, this one's about fast building and development, things that we want to see in the future here in New Mexico. One of the contextual pieces, I think, going into this is an episode we did just a little bit late 2024 here, and it was just about the population decline we're expecting to see here in New Mexico. That does make a big deal when you talk about the investments that private business wants to make here in the state. That study from UNM, it found a net loss of about 6,000 people leaving New Mexico since 2020. And they also found that the 0 to 24 population is expected to be around 550,000 people in 2040. That is about 20% less, over a decline of about 20% over 20 years. So when we think about private business, though, there have been some moments where companies have said they wanted to invest here, right? I think about Virgin Galactic. They did a few space launches here in 2024, but 2025 is expected to be completely silent for them. They're not expected to start flights again until 2026 with their next class of spaceships. I think about Maxion. They're a solar manufacturer. They said that they would be breaking ground on a $1 billion, 1,800 job Mesa del Sol manufacturing plant in early 2024. It is still dusty and quiet out there at Mesa del Sol. And we understand there's some new reporting suggesting that Maxion is going to be scaling back what it wants to invest in here in Albuquerque. Ebon Solar, they also said they're going to be building at Mesa del Sol, said that they would have hopefully a groundbreaking in 2024. Still hasn't happened yet. That would be a 900-job solar facility. Earlier this year, Universal Hydrogen, they bowed out of a planned development at the Sunport about more than 2 years after they said they'd build this manufacturing plant. Their departure was also followed by Orion, which, or I should say, was preceded by Orion, which was a satellite manufacturer that said it was going to build on that same space. So we have all of these stories, and you guys read the leads to these stories when we hear the big job announcement, the state partnership. And as I've said here, you've kind of ridden the wave of anchoring these types of stories. And then months later, the picture is different. With that in mind, as citizens here, as news people, where you can see just sort of which way things are going, do you at all have hope? Or what do you say to people who feel hopeless sometimes when they hear all these private developments happen and they don't quite happen as quickly as we all think they are going to?
I am infinitely bullish about New Mexico and the metro. I think the climate is amazing. I think that the traffic issues are non-existent when you compare us to a place like Austin, where you can spend 3 hours in traffic every day. The climate is fantastic. We talked about this before, that we don't have earthquakes or hurricanes or tornadoes. We're really it's sort of a blissful place to live in terms of climate, in terms of ease of living. I mean, it's a pretty easy place to live. I do think that one of the things that we need to really focus on and be concerned about is the number of college graduates we have, the number of we talk about people in the trades, and I think that's a really important part of this. You need to get people trained up who aren't interested in 4-year degrees so that they can get good paying jobs. But we also, I think, have a sort of a brain drain where we don't have enough. And I did this story maybe 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago, about studies that were showing we weren't graduating enough people or bringing in enough graduates to run just the basic functions of government, or that we actually needed more college grads just to run the administrative side of a state like ours. So I'm concerned about that. But I think that if we can answer some of those questions, I think it's going to be easier. I think we have an advantage that over time will show itself over places like Phoenix. I mean, there's certain advantages to Phoenix and a place that's that massive, but it's also, 1 million degrees half the year, right? I mean, there are other things, and the quality of life, I think, for me, I don't want to bag on Phoenix. Don't come after me, Phoenix. But for me, I really, I love it here, and I love the community that we have and the people we have, and I just feel like I'm really bullish about the future in that sense of good and better jobs coming here. And I think it doesn't take, I think you might even get to a tipping point where you have enough of these places finally open, and then you get to sort of a critical mass where there are enough really good jobs here and enough, qualified workers, skilled workers to take those jobs, that you get to another level. And I think that's totally possible yet, despite the gloom and doom.
I know. And
over there
coming some positive.
I feel the same. I love New Mexico. It's kept me here for so long, and I love everything about it. We don't have 118 degree weather like Phoenix does. Yeah. I do get frustrated though when we do read these stories, and I've asked business owners, I've asked, developers, and what's it going to take to move forward and get our downtown looking vibrant and getting, cleaning up some areas of our city. And a lot of it is, it's tougher to do business here in this state. And so I think that's something that our leaders need to look at, that, it's a lot easier to go to Phoenix and set up shop, and Texas is another one where you don't have as much red tape. You can go in, get things done. And I'd literally like, to look at that aspect of it and seeing, we were the size of Phoenix 30 years ago. We were the same size, and look at Phoenix Airport and look at ours, look at the growth there. And so I do think that there's so much potential for the city and the state. I mean, we're so unique and so rich in culture, and I just love everything. You go to the mountains, you can play golf in the winter. You just have everything you can imagine in this state. So I look at it that we're going to keep moving forward, and that we're looking, I want our leaders to keep looking at ways to get these big companies in. And then second, I also want us to look at education, because that's another problem that's holding us back. Like, we have these companies that want to come in, but they need a work base. And when they see that, they need workers to come in and work, and when we're struggling to graduate our students, when we're struggling, they're bringing kids here and we're struggling in education, like, we really, that's whole nother topic. But I think that, we need to keep making movement in that. Yeah.
Yeah. We got less than 5 minutes, but I'll just hit some quick ones that we have seen that seemingly
the speed round. I've been waiting for the speed round a little bit. Where's my buzzer?
The United Stadium, you'll notice a theme here of government investment. The United Stadium is one of them. They want to build over at Balloon Fiesta Park. It's still on pause due to some appeals from the neighborhood that are going through district court now. But that is a big project that the city seems to be continually, and the team standing behind. UNM has a brand new critical care tower that's going to serve a lot more people in terms of healthcare. Valencia County, after 20 years, is finally getting its hospital. That should open, I think, sometime in 2026. But that is a big milestone as well. And I would be remiss if I didn't add that the governor just announced wanting to have an RFP to redevelop Expo, New Mexico, which is state-owned land. That could be a huge, huge change for really the heart of the city. So there are things happening there. They do seem to trend toward government investment, though. I think that is the continued theme here. One last one, it is private investment, though. In-N-Out Burger still says it's coming to Albuquerque. So
We're all waiting. I can't wait.
by 2027, they say one location.
The perpetual newsroom rumor.
Yeah.
Right.
The release said by 2027, and I was like,
Yeah.
wait, is that a typo?
No,
Like,
yeah.
what?
Well, I think the part of that line that's interesting is they say with future expansion to other cities and years beyond, but they say the part of it is locations in Albuquerque. So locations.
Plural.
Yeah,
There's
it's
an
plural.
S.
Yes.
That's
Yeah.
plural. So
Well-
I'm curious. Anyway.
And really quickly, before you guys go, on par with like our new year looking forward questions, do you guys have any resolutions for 2025 that you're going to aim for? I'm putting you on the spot. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Dean, you wanted to be a beekeeper a couple years ago when we asked you, and Jessica, you said you wanted to be more present less time on your phone. Accomplishments or not?
Yes, I've read so much more this past year. I've read a ton of books, and I've tried to get off the phone, and that
good.
helped. That helped. I started reading a lot and read some great books.
I feel like I have been better about the phone and leaving it maybe until I come to work, so my mornings are a little calmer, right before my workday starts. In terms of beekeeping, and you know this, I was a beekeeper in the Peace Corps.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I taught beekeeping.
So return to
This could be the spring. This could be the spring.
Yes.
Because you have to order your bees right around now. If you don't order them soon, because you get them from Texas, you can't get them. They run out.
Yeah.
So
2025.
Yeah, I'm after 2025. It might be this spring if I could
Okay.
get some ordered up and some equipment.
Oh.
So
All right.
Well, Dean and Jess, thank you both for being here. We appreciate you sharing the information here. And we should let folks know. If you got a story idea, let us know. I'm at chris.mckee@krqe.com, also at Chris McKee TV.
And I'm Gabrielle.Burkhart@krqe.com via email and gburknm on social media. Thank you all for listening, and happy 2025.
thanks, guys.
Thank you, guys.